Okay, what's up, everyone? My name's John.
And I'm Wes.
And we are here. We're kicking things off. This is our first guest for season number 2.
Season 2, baby.
Wow. And this is a real treat. So, yet again, just as a reminder before we introduce our guest, for you folks listening, so we like to just explore the way that music intersects with what people do in their lives. That can look a lot different for a lot of different people. And in terms of this podcast, it equates to some really cool outcomes and conversations, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And, kind of quick recap of season 1. We had a lot of friends of ours on and some folks involved in community music work and sort of interact in that space. Some folks that work in studios, some folks that are sort of professional musicians in various capacities. So it was a lot of fun and definitely like some cool conversations about gear, some cool conversations about the creative process and sort of everything in between. So looking forward to sort of
to what
more
this
of
one
that.
has, which is, how about that for a segue? Because, I mean, I think we just ticked all those boxes. But without further ado, today we are joined by our friend Alex Tindal. Alex.
Hey, what's up?
Hey.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself? You know, just a real easy one.
What a horrifyingly open question.
Well, how about let's start with this. What do you do right now?
God, it keeps getting worse.
Right?
Okay. Let's try again.
No.
So, music.
Love it.
And how it intersects with your life.
Great.
I'm fortunate to know a little bit about you already, and I know the answer to that a little bit.
Sure.
But why don't you kind of just in a nutshell tell the folks sort of how it is that music intersects with what you tend to do on the day-to-day?
Well, I do like acting and writing and comedy. But I have a history of doing music. I wanted to be a rock star when I was younger and played in punk bands and stuff like that. So I never really know whether I am a failed musician or a failed comedian, but I think I'm kind of vacillating between both.
Right.
In terms of how it interacts, I mean, I'm just like, if I'm in a sketch troupe or working on something, I'm the guy that people know they can get to do a dance routine or come up with a little guitar song or sing a thing or whatever it is. But like that has manifested in some like pretty music forward projects. I used to improvise a show called Band Practice with some friends where we'd improvise a band practice. I used to improvise musicals at the Factory Theater for a month. Was one of my coolest gigs. That was great. We won a Dora Award, which is Toronto's like theater awards.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was really, really cool. We had like a 5-piece orchestra that would improvise with us, and we would improvise like a new 2-act, hour and a half, hour 40 musical every night in a real theater. It was really cool. So most of what I do is like a comedian, actor, writer, but because I have that musical background, I end up in the more musical situations, and sometimes like full musical production,
Right.
Which is nice as a comedian because it gives you that layer to be like, oh, this isn't real music.
Right.
I didn't write a song that I think is good that I'm showing you. It's just a joke. It's just a joke.
Yeah.
I'm not serious.
You're like, but seriously, it sounds good, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm going for. I'm going for it.
Yeah.
Yo, that actually sounds legit. And then you go, oh, come on, just a comedian.
whatever.
But thank
And
you.
then you turn around and go,
Yes,
Yeah.
I did it. Yeah, literally.
I find though, even like within that context, like that's interesting that you say that because I mean, as a musician, I am always just so in admiration of comedians because you're able to go up there and just like, if you're a good musician or you can play the song or you can play a song or you can sing well or play guitar well, like that's kind of like everybody, it's subjective, right? Like everybody can see that and gets that or whatever. But to be a good comedian, like that's so subjective to what jokes you're telling, who's in the audience, the crowd. Like, I don't know. It just, it terrifies me.
I think it's the same thing. I think it's just like a perspective, like the mechanics. If you can see the mechanics of it from the inside as a musician or see the mechanics of it from the inside as a comedian, I think it's the same thing. But I do think my life embodies that adage of all musicians want to be comedians and all comedians want to be musicians. And I think that's just internally I'm doing that all the time. It's like wanting.
Just depends on the hat that you're wearing that day or something like that.
Yeah, and literally inside of doing a comedic or musical project, trying to like make one the other.
Right. And so, and this makes me think too of how you said that by virtue of the fact that you are this like actor, writer, comedian, you have found your way, the kind of backdoor way into some really, really cool music projects, which
Yeah.
you potentially may not have
Yeah.
been able to do if you had emphasized more, focused more on the musical side of things, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because my pedigree as a musician when I kind of left high school was like being one of 1,000 pop punk bands in the 905, the suburban area.
Right.
And like, I don't know if it was that good or creative, but as a comedian, I think I started doing more creative work and ran with some cool crews that made cool stuff.
Right.
And so then when musicians were involved in those crews, I think their admiration and respect for my artistry as a comedian was a lot higher than it would have been if they'd encountered me as a musician. So then they'd be like, "Oh, you play music too? Oh, I love you on stage as a comedian. You should."
You're funny first, and then it's cool that you're a musician after, as opposed to, I guess, the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, I guess also that experience must like bode well for, especially as a young person, being able to like branch out into different genres of music and different stylings, right? Because I find like, I mean, oftentimes thinking back up just about my own like kind of experience playing music as like a teenager or a kid, I was just like into my one thing, and like I wasn't playing like other genres, I wasn't doing other things.
Well,
I was just
there's a lot more judgment of that too when you're younger and you're in high school.
Yeah.
And the thing of like, I remember I didn't really get as deep into like pop music and other forms of music until I kind of left high school in the suburb and was like, oh no, I like everything. It's a bit more high stakes to like pop music when you're in the middle of a punk scene.
For sure. Yeah. And especially I feel like when you're young, there is not as much, I guess it's in relation to the formulation of your identity, but it's just like, you know, when you find something, you hold on to it so closely that you're kind of like, nope, this has got to be it. This is my only thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Along similar lines for me, like I was such a metalhead growing up that I have realized, and I've had to work backwards to be like, there's so much cool hip hop I missed that was released in the moment at that time when I would have been like, nope. If it's not like super fast, cool guitars, I'm not interested. You know what I mean? Because I was playing guitar and that was just kind of the thing. And also this sort of somewhat insular nature of that type of an upbringing was similar to myself as well. It's not until you kind of grow a little bit and leave that and expand.
Yeah.
And so I think also, as you've alluded to, it's really cool that that different perspective was also afforded to you as a result of the acting and comedy thing as well, you know? And I think it's really interesting how you're right, where there's such a commonality with, you know, musicians who think they're funny or comedians who think that they might be
musicians. Anytime I hang out with musicians, they're all trying to crack a joke and crack everybody up. They're all trying to they're trying to be the funniest person in the room. And like anytime I hang out with comedians, it's like they want to party like rock stars. They want to show you cool bands. They want to, if there's a guitar, they want to show you like they want to have that kind of adulation, that kind of like rock god on stage, as opposed to like I'm a clown, right? whereas like a lot of rock, I mean, some rock stars or musicians are more uptight or ego driven, but a lot of them I think want to be funny, want to crack people up,
right? And I think it's also just, again, you sort of touched on this a moment earlier, just that notion of performance and how you kind of alluded to it. I'd like to ask you more about it, but you alluded to the fact that you're like, well, whether it's a sort of like stage or comedy performance or me playing in a band, it's sort of ultimately the same. So it also makes sense to me where it's like, if someone's like, I'm a comedian, like, why can't I just grab a guitar and jump on stage with a band or vice versa, you know? Although with different outcomes, and I would say you're someone where you can kind of celebrate that as a success, where like, you know, you do some really cool stuff with music, but then you're also hilarious and you do a great job with like, you know, writing and acting and comedy as well. And when you were saying that, it made me think of, you know, we first met and got to know each other from hanging out at Comedy Bar.
Yeah.
And what I loved about Comedy Bar, being there as a musician, was how the band attracted certain comedians and actors who would just naturally be like, oh, like, you guys are in the band? Cool. Yeah. I play guitar a little bit myself. Or like, you know, and it wasn't for everyone. Like, I feel like some people would talk a little bit about it and then leave. But like, you would be a perfect example of someone who like kind of week after week would come over and be like, hey, you guys ever heard of this band? And we would just talk into extensive detail. And again, it just shows that like, the relationship between those two runs deeper. You're more than just like a mere musician who also happens to be like a comedian or something like that, which is really cool.
I also just always gravitate, like, to me, musicians are the coolest thing. Music is the coolest thing. So it's the grass is always greener thing. It's like if I'm in this sketch troupe and we do this show, like sure that might be cool, but like that sketch troupe and those people I do that show with are my idiot friends. They're not this cool sketch troupe. They're like my idiot friends who I have petty arguments with and smell their bodies in the green room, and it's demystified, right?
Yeah. Right.
Whereas
Yeah.
and then some musicians show up and they set up their instruments and they play really well. I'm like, what's up, guys?
Yeah.
Whoa, you're it's still a bit mystified to me. You're not like this shitty group of dummies I do a sketch show.
Yeah.
You're
Meanwhile,
musicians.
I'm sure that if I was in one of those
a
situations,
band would be the same thing.
It's
yeah,
the
exactly.
exact same thing.
Or
right?
like
From
those times where we're hanging out and me like being like, oh, this guy Alex really knows his music. But most importantly, I was able to make him laugh at one point. Like looking for that like comedian side of things, being like, yes, I made a comedian laugh. But so I did want to kind of ask a little bit more because, on the way over here and thinking about us recording with you, doing this episode with you, like I did really want to know sort of like in relation to the performance, but even like cognitively when you're on stage or when you're preparing, like just how different or maybe more so how similar the vantage point is to a performance. Because, if I'm thinking about you, first off, like it's different if you're doing, say, sketch or something like that versus stand-up. But like, let's say sketch comedy, you're in an ensemble with a handful of people. You're probably not very seldom like solo on stage. Chances are there's at least one other person. So I can see how that's similar to being in a band. But at the same time, I feel like when you're a performer without like musical accompaniment, then like you're just naturally much more in the foreground as opposed to like I feel like as a band, and I know you play drums, like a drummer, you kind of sit back a little bit. Like,
well, that's even what I was alluding to off the top. Like as a musician, you're always behind something, right? Like you have something. Even as a singer, like you have your voice like coming out, into the crowd. But
I that's true, and I do feel that sometimes. But I also feel like, I think because I'm maybe a bit more fluid as a comedian than a musician. Like I can play music, but I kind of have to prepare more and be more ready. I think I'm behind the guitar or the drum kit or whatever, but there's also like that layer of refraction that I have to communicate through. Whereas for me, even though I don't get to hide behind something when I'm just performing comedy, I also have like the immediacy and the ease of communication. Whereas I don't have to translate an idea that I have into notes or scales or remember what key I'm in or find the frets or think of an idea and then be like, what rudiment is my hands doing to execute that? Like it's just more because I have more reps, because I have more hours under my belt on stage. Probably have more hours playing music than doing comedy, but not on stage
performing, doing the actual thing,
actually
doing.
And they're two very different things, right?
Oh yeah.
Like,
wow.
Oh yeah.
Well, especially in either scenario, and this is where they're similar, where I would feel like, especially if you're doing an improv show, it's almost like if you're jamming live with the band as a performance. In the moment, you think of an idea, and then you have to just be able to sort of flawlessly execute it to a point where it's harmonious with the other stuff that's going on. It doesn't take away. It's not too little. It's just like right there. It's a perfect kind of thing in the moment. So I can understand how between those two would be different, like as an actor versus like a musician.
Yeah, and you're like your shared understanding of the framework that you're working in when you're improvising together. What kind of song is this? What kind of improvisation is appropriate? What kind of improvisation will embellish and contribute to this? What kind of improvisation might change or break something that we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And the other analog that I was thinking when you were talking earlier is like there's other analogs in terms of like you say, like, oh, if I'm improvising, it's like, oh, just like get some people together and jam. There's also like, oh, okay, we have to do this one-off show. Can we learn all these sketches that we have in a Google Drive as kind of like a cover gig? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, okay, we're gonna get a chance to go through these once or twice, then we got to put them up, and it's kind of this like high stakes, a little higher strung. Versus like I did a show a couple weeks ago. Mark Little and Laura Silovitz and I did some sketches with Mr. Bruce McCullough of Kids in the Hall.
Right.
Wow.
Not with him, just on a show that he was doing. He had us open up. And those were some old sketches that we hadn't done in a while, but Laura and I knew them really well. And so that was fun because it was like was like a reunion with these old it's like the old tunes. So we got to get a bit deeper into them and really play, right? Which you don't necessarily get to do if it's like, oh, this is new material. We're like, this is the cover band or whatever. Like, it was like, oh, we were jamming out the old tunes, and like we got to get into some deep grooves in them and find some fun new stuff in them because we had that relaxed, connected thing about them.
Right, which makes sense, and that's just like a compliment to, as you said, sort of like you've got more, maybe you played music more, but you've got more time on stage as a performer.
Yeah.
So for you to have that comfort just simply by virtue of that, but then fall back on some like nice, comfortable old like goodies, oldies but goodies.
Yeah, I'm not worried when I'm not like,
right.
when I'm on stage performing comedy, I'm not really worried about anything. I know it's going to be fine. Whereas when I go on stage to perform music, I'm still very much like, will I do this how I rehearsed it? Will I do this?
Right.
Will I do this at a level that makes me proud?
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's interesting too, because even like just listening to you talk about sort of the duality of those two experiences, it seems like a very collaborative scenario for you in both instances, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're not like performing music as a solo artist.
No.
Right. And it doesn't sound like you're doing a lot of comedy by yourself. You're more kind of in that collaborative space.
I'm a collaborative.
Right.
Creative, definitely.
Which is really cool.
And then, and so like, what is that like, that creative process like then for you sometimes if you're in that collaborative space, as opposed, like, do you write stuff solo and then bring it to people, or do you like love jamming with people and seeing what happens? Or
yeah, that's interesting, because I work almost exclusively collaboratively, but I have trouble writing collaboratively. I prefer to write something on my own than bring it to a collective and then we jam it out, punch it up, whatever.
That makes sense.
Bring people's individual contributions and then work them out.
Right.
That totally makes sense. And it's like, it's nice to have a level of preparedness, because then I think when you have an idea, it gives you that ability to run with it when you are with people, and it is like that idea of like jamming, whether it's comedy or music.
Yeah.
If you have something and you can kind of run with it and just like see how it pans out and stuff like that, versus it's really hard sometimes. I think about it in the context of playing music, you're together with a group of people you've played a bunch of music with before, a cajillion different songs, and then someone goes, what song should we do? And you just all go like,
I don't know any songs right now.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, should we do like I don't know, like a Zeppelin song or, and like, even still you're like, well, what Zeppelin songs, like something that feels like it's so just like everybody would know these songs. And it's like, that's an example where showing up with a list of songs and being like, how about this? And then you run with it. It's like that same idea of showing up with something and then letting it run. And I can also understand too, how like just with the origins of an idea, it would be hard to sort of successfully work with someone, again, like with the origins of an idea, versus if you came in with someone and you have this idea and then they can kind of run with it and bounce off ideas and then you go back and forth.
I think when I'm forced into a situation or put in a situation or someone like is like, let's do this, where I end up writing with someone, it works out. But I just think I'm still so self-conscious and insecure about those beginning processes and like writing in general that it's like this thing I have to like go in a cave by myself and like torture myself until something comes out and then show it to other people. But if you put me in a room with other people and are like, here's the goal, I think I can do that too.
For sure.
It's just not usually how it happens.
Right. That makes sense. You're natural. That's just like your natural kind of course of action.
Yeah.
And I think that's, sorry to interject real quick, but I think that's like a very common experience in the arts in general, is like this idea of bringing something to people. It's like, it's got to be good. It's got to be like polished. It's got to be almost there, because there's that vulnerability aspect to it, right?
Well, and it's got to be the brilliant thing.
Yeah.
It is my discipline.
Yeah.
If I write a song or I write a sketch, it's like, this has to be the demonstration that I'm a worthy artist. That makes work on par with my taste. And what if I show you something where the work is like below my taste and I'm exposed as a fraud? All of those concerns.
And do you find that that's pretty those feelings that you mentioned and sort of the general vantage point to like creating something, is it on par in terms of like writing comedy with like creating music?
No, music's the hardest thing.
It's harder. Okay.
Yeah, because comedy, I don't know. I feel like if I write a sketch and I perform it and it gets a decent amount of laughs, great, we did it. It's not, I'm not as precious about like the structure of it being elegant and all of that. Whereas like when I write a song and show it to someone, you don't get that immediate feedback of like, are they laughing at it? I did the job. It's like, well, were they affected by it?
Yeah.
Did they resonate with them? Were they moved by it?
Yeah.
It's like those are like much more intangible qualities. So I don't know. It's always been way more precious and way more vulnerable to like. But then again, not with like a piece of scoring.
Okay.
It's that I think it's like a voice thing. It's like a vulnerability, like bearing thing. Like if I write a song about a heartbreak or something, that's like the thing that I'll never show anyone.
Right.
Whereas like writing music, yeah, for scoring or something, I love doing that because it just feels like just the music then. Like obviously I'm still putting my emotionality and my sensibility into it, but it doesn't feel as like naked.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a different kind of personal.
Yeah.
You're still conveying the emotion, but it's a different kind of a personal.
And I'm also like conveying the emotion. It's like, oh, I'm not like, this isn't me. This is like the thing you asked me to score.
Right,
I'm just supporting that.
Right.
This is it's not my emotions.
Yeah.
It's just the film's emotions.
I see,
right? As opposed to like,
And I
here's a song I wrote in a coffee house. Just fucking,
well, that's it,
Yeah.
right? It comes back to that vulnerability piece too. Because I guess with comedy, to a certain extent, you still have that layer of like you said, even off the top, it's like, I gotta write a song, but it's still supposed to be funny, right?
Yeah.
So there's always kind of that element to it. Whereas if you write a personal like heartbreak song,
in comedy, you're literally subverting the vulnerability.
Yeah.
You're going out and you're being like, here's my vulnerability. And
Exactly.
And the audience laughs and you go, haha, yeah, it's just fake.
Yeah.
It's not my real vulnerability. It's just a thing I wrote for laughs. Cool,
Right.
cool.
Whereas like if you play a
that
song
is-
afterwards, people are like, Alex, you okay, man?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's no hiding. There's no hiding.
yeah.
It's like, no, I just tossed that
There
one
it is,
off.
yeah.
That's not.
It's
It's like,
all
no,
up
that's
there. Yeah.
that's your real vulnerability.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that was awesome, and I'm very excited about part 2 of this conversation with Alex.
Yeah, so we'll continue where we left off in terms of examining Alex as both a musician and a writer and performer and things like that. Thank you very much for listening, and stay tuned for part 2 of this episode.